I never thought I'd be writing this, but here I am at 2 a.m., shaking as I type. Today was supposed to be our special day, and instead it's become the worst day of my life. So I was planning this amazing surprise for our 5th wedding anniversary. We've been together for 8 years total, and honestly, things had been rocky lately. Work stress, financial pressure, the usual stuff that makes couples drift apart. I thought maybe a romantic gesture would help us reconnect, you know? I'd been saving up secretly for months to book us a weekend getaway to this cute bed and breakfast we'd talked about visiting. The plan was to surprise him when he got home from work. I'd already packed our bags, made dinner reservations, the whole 9 yards. But I needed to use his laptop to print out the booking confirmation because my old computer finally died last week. He's always been weird about his devices, but we're married, right? What's the big deal? I opened his browser and that's when my world completely fell apart. His dating profile was right there, not just active but recently updated. The photos were recent too. I recognized the shirt he'd worn to his company picnic just 2 weeks ago. His status said he was single, looking for something serious, and get this, he'd been active that very morning. Our anniversary morning. I felt like I was going to throw up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely scroll through his messages. There were dozens of conversations with different women. Some were just casual chatting, but others were, well, let's just say they weren't planning to discuss the weather if they ever met up. The worst part? He'd been telling these women that he was recently divorced and ready to start fresh. Recently divorced. We'd literally had breakfast together that morning and he'd kissed me goodbye like everything was normal. I sat there for probably an hour just staring at the screen, reading through message after message. One woman in particular caught my attention because they'd been talking for weeks. She seemed really sweet, talking about her kids and how hard it was to date as a single mom. He was being so charming with her, using the same lines he'd used on me when we first met. It made me sick. But here's where it gets really twisted. I decided to create my own fake profile to see just how deep this rabbit hole went. I used photos from my college roommate's social media, with her permission later, don't worry, and made up a whole persona. Within an hour, he'd messaged me. My own husband was trying to pick me up while I was literally sitting in our living room. The conversation was surreal. He was being flirty and funny, all the things that made me fall for him in the first place. But it felt like talking to a stranger because this version of him was supposedly single and available. He suggested meeting for coffee that weekend, the same weekend I'd planned our anniversary getaway. When he came home that evening, I was sitting at our kitchen table with printed screenshots spread out in front of me. I'd also made his favorite dinner, which in hindsight was probably petty, but I wasn't thinking clearly. He walked in all smiles, probably expecting our usual routine, and just froze when he saw the papers. I'll never forget the look on his face. It wasn't guilt or shame like you'd expect. It was annoyance. He was annoyed that he'd been caught, not sorry for what he'd done. He tried to play it off at first, saying it was just harmless flirting, that he never actually met up with anyone. But I'd seen the messages where he'd made plans with at least 3 different women over the past month. Then he got defensive, saying I was invading his privacy by looking at his laptop. Can you believe that? I'm invading his privacy when he's the one with secret dating profiles. The argument got heated fast. He accused me of being controlling and paranoid, said maybe this was why he felt the need to look elsewhere. That hit me like a punch to the gut. But you know what the real kicker was? He'd forgotten it was our anniversary entirely. When I brought it up, he looked genuinely confused for a moment before trying to cover with some excuse about being stressed at work. 5 years of marriage, and he'd completely forgotten the day we'd promised to love each other forever. I ended up sleeping in our guest room that night. He didn't even try to stop me or apologize properly. I could hear him on the phone in our bedroom, probably talking to his friends or maybe even one of his dating app matches for all I know. Update 1. It's been 3 weeks since I discovered everything, And somehow things have gotten even more complicated than I thought possible. I need to share this because I'm losing my mind and don't know who else to talk to. So after that first horrible night, he actually seemed to take things seriously for about a week. He deleted the dating profiles, or so he claimed, started coming home earlier, even brought me flowers twice. I was cautiously optimistic, thinking maybe we could work through this. I know, I was being naive. But then last Tuesday, I got a call at work from a woman asking for me by name. She said she needed to talk to me about my husband, and my stomach just dropped. Turns out, she was one of the women he'd been messaging. She'd figured out who he really was after doing some digging because something about his story didn't add up. This woman, let's call her Sarah, is actually a private investigator in her day job. She'd been chatting with him for about 6 weeks and had gotten suspicious when some of his details didn't match up between conversations. So she did what private investigators do, she investigated. Found our wedding photos on social media, cross-referenced his phone number, the whole professional treatment. Sarah asked to meet me for coffee, and honestly, I was curious. Part of me wanted to know exactly what he'd been telling these women, and part of me needed to hear from someone else who'd been deceived by him too. Meeting Sarah was surreal. She's actually really nice, funny, smart, accomplished. She showed me screenshots of their entire conversation, and I felt awful for her. He'd spun this elaborate story about being divorced for 2 years, said his ex-wife had cheated on him and that's why he was so cautious about trusting again. The irony was not lost on either of us. But here's where it gets crazy. Sarah told me she'd found evidence that he wasn't just on one dating app. He had profiles on at least 4 different platforms, some dating back over 2 years. 2 years. This wasn't some recent marriage crisis thing, he'd been doing this for almost half our marriage. She'd also discovered he'd actually met up with women before. There were credit card charges at restaurants across town during times when he'd told me he was working late or out with his college buddies. Hotel charges too, which made me feel physically sick. I confronted him that night with Sarah's evidence. This time, he couldn't play it off as harmless flirting because we had proof of actual meetups and who knows what else. His whole demeanor changed. The fake remorse disappeared and he got angry, really angry. He accused me of conspiring against him with strangers, said I was crazy for meeting with Sarah, and tried to turn the whole thing around on me again. Then he said something that I keep replaying in my head. He said that maybe if I'd been more attentive to his needs, he wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. He made it sound like I'd driven him to cheat by being a bad wife. I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what I did wrong, but honestly, I can't think of anything major. Sure, we both got comfortable in our routine, but I never stopped loving him or trying to make our marriage work. The really messed up part is that I started believing him for a hot minute. I actually wondered if I had been neglecting him somehow, if there were signs I'd missed that he was unhappy. I spent days going through our recent months together, analyzing every conversation and interaction, trying to find where I'd failed as a wife. But then I remembered something. About 6 months ago, he'd suggested we start doing more things separately, said it was healthy for couples to maintain their independence. I'd thought it was sweet that he wanted us both to have our own interests and friend groups. Now I realize he was just creating opportunities to sneak around. I also remembered how he'd started being really protective of his phone and laptop around that same time. He'd always keep them face down, would take calls in the other room, got jumpy if I came near when he was typing. At the time, I chalked it up to work stress, but now it's obvious he was hiding something. The worst realization is that he'd been planning to leave me for months. Sarah found messages where he'd talked about how he was ready to move on from his marriage but wanted to make sure he had options lined up first. He was literally shopping for my replacement while still sharing a bed with me every night. I've been staying at my sister's place for the past week because I can't stand being in our house right now. Everything reminds me of what I thought we had versus what was actually happening. The guest room where I spent that awful first night, our kitchen table where I confronted him, Even our bedroom feels contaminated now knowing he was messaging other women while I slept next to him. My sister has been amazing through all this, but I can tell she's worried about me. I've barely been eating, can't sleep properly, and I've called in sick to work 3 times because I can't stop crying randomly. Yesterday I was in the grocery store and saw a couple holding hands in the cereal aisle, and I just lost it right there between the Cheerios and the granola. The thing that's eating at me most is how good he was at lying. Like, scary good. He could look me straight in the eye and tell me he loved me, then go message other women an hour later. How do you do that to someone you promised to spend your life with? How do you fake intimacy so convincingly? I keep thinking about all the times he'd come home late and seem extra affectionate, or when he'd suggest we order takeout instead of me cooking because he wanted to spend more time together. Was he feeling guilty after meeting someone else? Was the extra attention his way of overcompensating? Or was I just reading into normal behavior because now I know the truth? Update 2. I honestly don't know how my life became this complicated, but I need to update you all because the situation has taken several turns I never saw coming. First, the divorce papers. I finally filed them last Monday after weeks of going back and forth. My sister helped me find a good lawyer, and when we sat down to discuss everything, she told me something that floored me. Apparently, in our state, if you can prove adultery with evidence, it affects how assets get divided. All those credit card statements and dating profiles Sarah helped me collect? They're actually worth something in court. My husband, I guess I should call him my soon-to-be ex-husband, didn't take the divorce filing well. He showed up at my sister's place at midnight 2 days ago, drunk and demanding to talk. My sister's husband had to threaten to call the police before he left. The next morning, I found out he'd been calling my friends and family, telling them I'd had a mental breakdown and was making up stories about him cheating. Several people actually believed him at first. My mom called me crying, saying she was worried about my mental health and maybe I should consider getting help instead of destroying my marriage over paranoid delusions. That hurt more than I can describe. Here I am, the victim of years of deception, and somehow I'm the one who's supposedly lost touch with reality. But then something unexpected happened. Sarah, the private investigator who'd originally contacted me, called with news. She'd been feeling guilty about the whole situation and decided to do some more digging on her own time. What she found was bigger than either of us had imagined. Turns out, my husband had been involved in something called catfishing scams. He wasn't just cheating, he'd been building fake emotional relationships with women online to get money from them. Sarah found evidence of at least 6 women who'd sent him cash over the past year, thinking they were helping their boyfriend through various fake emergencies. One woman had sent him $3,000 because he told her his grandmother needed emergency surgery and he was broke. Another had been regularly sending smaller amounts because he claimed he was struggling to pay rent after his divorce. These women thought they were in serious relationships with him, and he was just bleeding them dry while coming home to our shared life every night. When Sarah showed me the evidence, I felt sick for days. It wasn't just that he'd been cheating on me, he'd been financially exploiting vulnerable women who genuinely cared about him. Some of these women had kids and were struggling financially themselves, but they'd sacrificed to help someone they loved who didn't even exist. I realized I had to contact these women. It felt horrible to be the bearer of such devastating news, but they deserved to know the truth. Sarah helped me reach out to the ones we could identify. The conversations were heartbreaking. One woman had been planning to introduce him to her teenage daughter. Another had been saving up to visit him for the holidays. But here's where the story takes another crazy turn. When we contacted the woman who'd sent the $3,000, she told us something that made my blood run cold. She said that after she'd sent the money, he'd started pressuring her for more personal information, her address, her work schedule, details about her daily routine. When she got uncomfortable and started asking questions, he'd gotten angry and manipulative, making her feel guilty for not trusting him. Sarah and I realized this was way beyond just cheating or even financial scams. We were potentially looking at someone who was stalking multiple women and gathering information that could be used to hurt them. We decided we had to go to the police. The detective who took our report was amazing. She said they'd been tracking similar cases and our evidence might help with an ongoing investigation. Apparently, there'd been reports of women being harassed or having their personal information misused after meeting men online, and the pattern matched what we discovered about my husband. 2 days after we filed the police report, my husband was arrested at his workplace. I found out when his brother called me, furious and demanding to know what lies I'd told the police. He accused me of trying to destroy his brother's life out of spite over our marriage falling apart. But the truth is, I never wanted any of this. 6 weeks ago, I was just a woman planning a surprise anniversary getaway. I thought my biggest problem was that my marriage had gotten a little stale and we needed to reconnect. I never imagined I was living with someone capable of systematically deceiving and exploiting multiple women. The hardest part is dealing with people who think I'm overreacting or should have tried harder to save my marriage. My mother-in-law called me yesterday, crying and begging me to drop the charges because I'm ruining her son's life. She said everyone makes mistakes and I should be more forgiving. But this wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are forgetting to take out the trash or double booking dinner plans. This was years of calculated deception. This was him building fake relationships with vulnerable women and taking their money while lying to my face every single day. This was him gathering personal information that could have put these women in danger. I've been seeing a counselor, not couples therapy like some people suggested, but individual sessions to help me process everything that's happened. She's helped me understand that I'm not responsible for his choices, and that protecting these other women isn't vindictive, it's the right thing to do. The counselor also helped me realize something important. I'd been so focused on trying to figure out what I did wrong in our marriage that I'd lost sight of the fact that nothing I could have done differently would have justified his actions. Even if I had been the world's worst wife, which I wasn't, that wouldn't have given him the right to cheat, lie, steal, and potentially endanger other women. My sister has been incredible through all of this. She's let me stay at her place for over a month now, and she's never once made me feel like I'm imposing. Her kids have been sweet too. They don't really understand what's happening, but they've been extra huggy and keep drawing me pictures to cheer me up. Work has been understanding too, thankfully. My boss pulled me aside last week and said she'd noticed I was struggling, and if I needed to take some time off or adjust my schedule while I dealt with personal issues, that was fine. I almost cried right there in her office. It's amazing how much kindness from other people can mean when your world has been turned upside down. I've started slowly telling our mutual friends what really happened. Most have been supportive, but some have been weird about it. A few seem to think that marriage problems should stay private, like I should have quietly divorced him without involving the police or protecting the other women he was scamming. It's frustrating, but I'm learning that some people would rather maintain their comfortable illusions than deal with ugly truths. The legal process is ongoing, so I can't share all the details, but I can say that the investigation has uncovered even more victims than we initially found. Some of these women had been sending him money for over a year. The amounts weren't always huge, but they added up. One woman calculated that she'd sent him almost $8,000 over 18 months. What really gets to me is thinking about how he used that money. Was he using their cash to pay for dates with other women? Did he buy me gifts with money stolen from women who thought they were helping someone they loved? The thought makes me feel complicit somehow, even though I had no idea what was happening. Final update. It's been 4 months since I first found those dating profiles, and I honestly feel like I've lived through about 5 different lifetimes. I'm writing this final update because the legal stuff is mostly wrapped up now, and I wanted to share how everything ended up because it's not at all what I expected when this nightmare started. The police investigation revealed that my ex-husband had been running these scams for almost 3 years, starting just 2 years into our marriage. They found evidence of at least 15 different women he'd targeted, with total financial damages over $40,000. Some women had been sending him money for more than 2 years, thinking they were in committed relationships with someone who genuinely cared about them. The really disturbing part was how sophisticated his operation had become. He'd created elaborate fake social media profiles, had fake friends who would vouch for his stories, and had even used voice-changing apps to call some of these women pretending to be his fake roommate or coworker to back up his lies. The level of premeditation was honestly terrifying. He ended up pleading guilty to multiple charges of fraud and identity theft. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to all his victims. He also has to register as a convicted fraudster, which will make it much harder for him to pull this kind of thing again in the future. But here's the plot twist I never saw coming. About 6 weeks ago, I got a call from a woman who said she was an investigative journalist working on a story about online romance scams. She'd heard about my case through the court records and wanted to interview me about my experience. At first, I wasn't interested. I just wanted to move on with my life and put this whole mess behind me. But she explained that romance scams are becoming epidemic, and most people don't realize how sophisticated and common they've become. She said my story could help other people recognize the warning signs and protect themselves. I finally agreed to do the interview, and it turned out to be incredibly healing. Talking to someone objective about everything that had happened helped me process a lot of feelings I'd been carrying around. The journalist also connected me with other women who'd been through similar experiences, and realizing I wasn't alone in this was huge for my recovery. The article came out 3 weeks ago, and the response has been overwhelming. I've gotten hundreds of messages from people sharing their own stories or thanking me for speaking up. Several women reached out to say the article helped them realize they were currently being scammed, and they were able to protect themselves before losing money or worse. But the most surprising contact came from a woman whose message made me cry happy tears for the first time in months. She said she'd been dating a man online for 6 months and was planning to send him money for a fake emergency when she read my story. Something about the details felt familiar, so she did some digging and realized it was the same guy, my ex-husband, apparently running new scams even while awaiting sentencing. She contacted the police with her evidence, and it turns out he'd been operating new profiles from his friend's house, targeting women even after being arrested. This violation of his bail conditions means he'll likely face additional charges and a longer sentence. More importantly, this woman and who knows how many others won't become his victims. On a personal level, I'm doing so much better than I ever thought possible. I moved into my own apartment 2 months ago, nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom place with big windows and a little balcony where I can grow herbs. It's the first space that's been truly mine since college, and I love everything about it. I've reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage, and I'm embarrassed to realize how much I'd isolated myself without noticing. My ex had this subtle way of making me feel guilty for spending time with other people, always claiming he missed me or had special plans for us when I wanted to go out with friends. I thought it was sweet at the time, but now I see it was control. I've also started doing things I'd forgotten I enjoyed. I joined a hiking group that meets every weekend, and I'm taking a pottery class at the community college. These might sound like small things, but they feel revolutionary after years of making every decision based on what he wanted or what would make him happy. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks ago. Since he's in prison and facing significant financial obligations to his fraud victims, I didn't get much in the way of assets. But honestly, I don't care. I just wanted to be legally free of him and able to move forward with my life. I did keep our wedding ring, but not for sentimental reasons. I had it melted down and made into a pendant with an inscription that reads, "Truth always wins." It reminds me that no matter how elaborate someone's lies are, reality has a way of surfacing eventually. The women he scammed have formed an informal support group, and we check in with each other regularly. It's been amazing to see how strong and resilient they all are. One woman used the experience to completely change careers and now works helping fraud victims navigate the legal system. Another started a blog about online dating safety that's reached thousands of people. I think the thing that's helped me heal most is realizing that his actions weren't a reflection of my worth or our marriage. He wasn't cheating and scamming because I was inadequate, he was doing it because that's who he is. Someone who's willing to systematically deceive and exploit people they claim to love isn't someone who was ever capable of a real relationship in the first place. My therapist helped me understand that I'd been grieving not just the end of my marriage, but the loss of the person I thought I'd married. The kind, faithful husband I'd loved for 8 years never actually existed. I was mourning a fiction, which is why the grief felt so complicated and confusing. Now, 4 months later, I can honestly say I'm grateful this all came to light. Yes, it was devastating and traumatic, and I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone. But living with a lie, even a comfortable one, isn't really living. I was in love with a ghost while my real life passed by unnoticed. I'm not ready to date yet, and I might not be for a long time. But I'm okay with that. I'm learning to enjoy my own company again, to trust my instincts, and to recognize red flags I was blind to before. When and if I decide to open my heart to someone new, I'll be a much wiser person than I was before. To anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, trust your gut. If something feels off, investigate. Don't let anyone make you feel crazy for asking questions or wanting transparency. Real love doesn't require deception, and real partners don't make you doubt your own reality. And if you discover that someone you trusted has been lying to you, remember that their deception is about them, not about you. You deserved honesty, respect, and fidelity. You deserved a real relationship, not an elaborate performance designed to hide someone's true nature. I'm signing off from this chapter of my life with gratitude for everyone who supported me through the darkest months, pride in my own strength for surviving and seeking justice, and hope for whatever comes next. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you opens the door to the best thing that's yet to come. Thank you to everyone who followed this story and offered support and encouragement. Your kindness meant more than you'll ever know.